The kitchen sink had been dripping for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of that maddening plink, plink, plink echoing through our supposedly perfect suburban home like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. I should have known it was an omen. My name is Michael Thompson, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's best served publicly, with witnesses, and with enough documentation to make it stick. But let me start with that dinner. The dinner that changed everything. Could you at least pretend to care about fixing things around here? Olivia's voice cut through the dining room like a blade. She was addressing me, but her eyes were fixed on my parents, who sat frozen over their pot roast like deer in headlights. Mom had spent 3 hours making that roast. Dad had brought wine, the good stuff from his retirement stash. They'd driven 2 hours from their little retirement community because Olivia had specifically invited them for a nice family dinner. What they got instead was a front row seat to my wife's character assassination. The sink's been dripping for weeks, she continued, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass. The gutters are falling apart. The lawn looks like a wasteland. But Michael's too busy with his little accounting firm to notice that his actual home is falling down around us. I looked up from my plate, where I'd been methodically cutting my meat into precise squares, a nervous habit I'd developed over 17 years of marriage. I fixed the gutters last month, Liv, and I've been waiting for the part for the sink faucet. It's on back order. There's always an excuse. She turned to my parents with that smile, the one she used on difficult clients. You know how he is. Everything has to be done his way, on his timeline. God forbid anyone else has needs or opinions. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's fork trembled slightly as she set it down. Dad cleared his throat, the way he always did when he was about to try to make peace. Well, Dad said carefully, maybe we could help with some of the repairs. I've got time on my hands these days, and... That's not the point, Olivia snapped. The point is that I shouldn't have to ask my in-laws to fix what my husband should be handling. I work 60 hours a week selling real estate, I manage this household, I take care of Sophie's school activities, and what do I get? A husband who can't even be bothered to fix a leaky sink. Sophie. Our 17-year-old daughter, who had conveniently found somewhere else to be tonight. Smart kid. I set down my knife and fork with deliberate precision. You want to talk about what's really bothering you, Liv? Or are we going to keep pretending this is about home repairs? Her face went pale, then flushed red. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table between us. Should I call Trevor and ask him to join us for dessert? I'm sure he'd love to meet my parents. The wine glass slipped from Olivia's fingers, shattering against her plate. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth. How dare you, she whispered. How dare I what? Know that my wife has been screwing her coworker for the past 6 months? How dare I notice that she's been working late every Tuesday and Thursday, which coincidentally are the same nights Trevor posts gym selfies from the Marriott downtown? I picked up my phone and scrolled through screenshots. How dare I pay attention when she starts buying new lingerie and suddenly needs to work weekends in cities 2 hours away? Mom gasped. Dad's face had turned the color of his wine. Olivia stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. Your family is toxic, Michael. They've never accepted me, never thought I was good enough for their precious son. And you've become just like them. Controlling, suspicious, small-minded. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I looked at my parents' stricken faces, then back at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, who stood there trembling with righteous indignation, as if she were the victim in this scenario. Then I did something that surprised all of us, including myself. I laughed. You want a divorce? I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. Let's call my lawyer right now. Get the ball rolling. I hit speakerphone and dialed. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Jim Morrison's office. This is Patricia. Hi, Patricia. It's Michael Thompson. Is Jim available? I need to file for divorce proceedings immediately. The silence in the dining room was absolute. Even the dripping sink seemed to have stopped. Oh, Mr. Thompson. Yes, he's here. Let me put you through. Michael? Jim's voice filled the room. What's going on? My wife just asked for a divorce, Jim, in front of my parents. I'd like to get the paperwork started as soon as possible. Olivia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. This wasn't how she'd planned it. She'd expected tears, begging, promises to change. What she got was a man who'd been 3 steps ahead of her for months. I can have the papers drawn up by tomorrow morning, Jim said. Do you want to go with the standard 50-50 split, or... Actually, let's discuss that in your office. I have some documentation that might affect the settlement. I looked directly at Olivia. Some evidence of marital misconduct that could impact asset division. I'll see you at 9 a.m., Jim said. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Olivia was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Mom? Dad?" I said, standing up. "I'm sorry you had to witness this. Why don't you head back to your hotel? I'll call you tomorrow." They left without a word, moving like people fleeing a natural disaster. After they were gone, Olivia and I stood on opposite sides of the dining room table, the broken wine glass and stained tablecloth between us like a crime scene. "You think you're so smart," she said finally. "No, Liv. I think you're predictable." I started clearing the dishes. "You've been planning this for months. The affair, the divorce demand, probably even the timing. Oh, you thought you'd catch me off guard, make me the bad guy in front of my parents, get me emotional so I'd agree to whatever terms you wanted." She didn't deny it. "Here's what you didn't count on," I continued, scraping plates with methodical efficiency. "I've been an accountant for 20 years. I notice patterns. I pay attention to details, and I've been documenting everything." "You can't prove anything." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. "We'll see about that." That night, after Olivia locked herself in the guest bedroom, I sat in my home office surrounded by manila folders, bank statements, phone records, and photographs. 6 months of careful documentation. 6 months of playing the oblivious husband while building an airtight case. Trevor Morrison. 35 years old, divorced, drives a leased BMW, lives in a flashy downtown condo he can barely afford. Olivia's coworker at Premier Realty, where they'd been carrying on their affair with all the subtlety of a car alarm. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Jim, attaching files. Hotel receipts charged to Trevor's credit card, photos of them entering and leaving the Marriott, screenshots of text messages Olivia thought she'd deleted, bank records showing cash withdrawals that corresponded exactly with their business trips. But that was just the beginning. See, the thing about being an accountant is that you learn to see the bigger picture, and the bigger picture here wasn't just adultery, it was fraud. Olivia and Trevor had been using company resources for personal trips, billing clients for services never rendered, and skimming commission on deals they'd worked together. I'd stumbled across it by accident while reviewing our joint credit card statements. One receipt led to another, which led to a pattern of financial misconduct that would not only destroy their relationship, but end both their careers. As I worked through the night, organizing evidence and preparing for war, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement. For the first time since I'd discovered the affair, I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the hunter. The next morning, I woke up to find Olivia's side of the bed empty and her car gone from the driveway. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Staying at Sarah's. Don't contact me except through lawyers." Sarah Chen was Olivia's best friend and fellow real estate agent, a woman who'd never liked me and had probably been encouraging this affair from the beginning. Perfect. Let them plot together. It would make what came next even more satisfying. I made coffee, read the news, and waited for my phone to ring. It didn't take long. "Dad?" Sophie's voice was tight with anxiety. "Mom called me. She says you guys are getting divorced." My daughter was a senior at Westfield High, captain of the debate team, and smart enough to know there was more to this story than her mother was telling her. "That's right, sweetheart. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "She says you're being vindictive and cruel, that you're trying to destroy her reputation." I closed my eyes. Of course Olivia had gotten to Sophie first, spinning the narrative to make herself the victim. "What do you think, Soph? Have I ever been vindictive or cruel to anyone?" Silence, then quietly. "No, but she's really upset, Dad. She was crying." "I'm sure she was. Are you okay? Do you want to talk about this in person?" I need some time to process this. Can we talk this weekend?" "Of course. I love you, kiddo." "I love you too, Dad." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen, our kitchen, and felt the full weight of what Olivia had done. She hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd weaponized our daughter against me. That was a mistake she was going to regret. At 9 a.m. sharp, I was in Jim Morrison's office with 3 manila folders full of evidence. Jim was a bulldog of a lawyer, short and stocky with graying hair, and the kind of aggressive competence that made opposing counsel nervous. We'd gone to high school together, and he'd handled my business contracts for years. "Jesus, Michael," he said, flipping through photographs of Olivia and Trevor at various hotels. "You've been busy." "Just thorough. What are we looking at for the divorce?" "With this evidence, adultery, financial misconduct, fraud, she'll be lucky to walk away with her car." He paused at a bank statement showing a series of suspicious transactions. "This could be criminal." "I don't want her arrested, Jim. I want her destroyed." He looked up sharply. "That doesn't sound like you." "The old me wouldn't have fought back. The old me would have quietly agreed to 50-50 and tried to preserve everyone's dignity. I leaned back in my chair. But the old me didn't know his wife was a lying, cheating thief who was perfectly willing to turn his own daughter against him. Jim nodded slowly. What do you want me to do? File the papers, include everything, and make sure copies find their way to the right people at Premier Realty. Michael, she made this public when she humiliated me in front of my parents. Now it's my turn. That afternoon, I drove to Ray's gym on the south side of town. Ray Kowalski had been my best friend since college, a former Golden Gloves boxer who'd opened his own training facility after a shoulder injury ended his professional dreams. The gym was a temple to controlled violence. Heavy bags, speed bags, and a full-size ring where local fighters trained for amateur bouts. It smelled like sweat, leather, and determination. You look like shit, Ray said by way of greeting. He was working the heavy bag, his fists wrapped in tape, sweat streaming down his tattooed arms. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Olivia finally pulled the trigger on the divorce? I shouldn't have been surprised that he knew. Ray had always been perceptive, and I'd been a terrible actor for the past few months. Last night, in front of my parents. He stopped punching and turned to face me. Classy. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to ruin her. Ray studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. About time. You've been playing defense for too long. Want to hit something? For the next hour, I worked out my frustrations on the heavy bag while Ray coached me through combinations I hadn't thrown in 20 years. My hands were soft from decades of office work, but the muscle memory was still there. You know, Ray said as I caught my breath between rounds, Trevor Morrison comes in here sometimes, thinks he's tough because he pays for personal training sessions with Marcus. Really? Yeah, pretty boy who's never been in a real fight. The kind of guy who folds the minute someone hits back. Ray grinned. Just thought you should know. That evening, I drove past Premier Realty's downtown office. The lights were on in the conference room, and I could see Olivia and Trevor through the windows, heads close together over a stack of papers, probably strategizing about the divorce, dividing up assets they thought they were entitled to. I parked across the street and took photos with my phone's zoom lens. Not for legal purposes. I already had enough evidence. These were for something else entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Trevor. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. Ray's gym. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone. The response came immediately. This isn't a game, Michael. You're right, I replied. Games have rules. The next day was a blur of meetings with lawyers, accountants, and private investigators. Jim had been busy. The divorce papers had been filed, and copies of the financial evidence had been delivered to Premier Realty's corporate office. By noon, both Olivia and Trevor had been suspended pending an internal investigation. My phone had been ringing all day, Olivia calling from different numbers, trying to reach me. I let every call go to voicemail. Michael, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. Please call me back. We can work this out. The desperation in her voice was music to my ears. At 7:45 p.m., I was at Ray's gym, warming up on the speed bag. The evening training session had ended, and the gym was empty except for Ray, who was cleaning equipment and pretending not to watch the door. Trevor arrived exactly on time, looking nervous and out of place in his expensive suit and Italian leather shoes. Michael, he said, approaching cautiously. Thanks for agreeing to meet. I kept hitting the speed bag, maintaining a steady rhythm. You said we needed to talk, so talk. Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be, but what you're doing, it's going to destroy both our careers. Your careers? I stopped punching and turned to face him. Interesting choice of words. Most people would lead with an apology. He had the grace to look embarrassed. You're right, I'm sorry. What happened between Olivia and me? It wasn't supposed to go this far. How far was it supposed to go, Trevor? I don't know. It just happened. We were working late. She was having problems at home. Problems at home? I stepped closer, and he instinctively backed up. What kind of problems? She said you were controlling, that you didn't appreciate her, that the marriage had been over for years. I nodded thoughtfully. And you believed her? Yes. Did she mention that she was stealing from your company? Skimming commissions, billing fake expenses, using corporate credit cards for personal trips? His face went pale. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him a spreadsheet. Every fraudulent transaction, cross-referenced with your hotel visits. You've been her accomplice for months, whether you knew it or not. Trevor stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I didn't know. She handled all the paperwork. She said it was standard procedure. She played you, Trevor, just like she played me. The only difference is I figured it out first. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want you to understand something. I stepped close enough that he had to crane his neck to look up at me. You didn't just sleep with my wife. You helped her steal from her employer, lie to our daughter, and humiliate me in front of my parents. You made this personal. It was just business. No. My voice was quiet. Business is what I do Monday through Friday. This is personal, and personal has consequences. He tried to back away, but bumped into the heavy bag. Are you threatening me? I don't make threats, Trevor. I make promises. And here's my promise to you. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never heard the name Olivia Thompson. I walked toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and Trevor, next time you want to meet, make sure you're not wearing a wire. He looked down at his jacket in panic, patting his chest. I'm not... I know. But the fact that you checked tells me everything I need to know about your character. I left him standing there, shaking and alone in the empty gym. The war began in earnest the next morning. I woke up early, made coffee, and checked my email. Jim had sent me an update. Premier Realty's corporate office had launched a full investigation into Olivia and Trevor's activities. Their company credit cards had been frozen, their access to client files suspended, and both were facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement. But that was just the opening move. I showered, dressed in my best suit, and drove to the First National Bank, where I'd been a customer for 15 years. My business account manager, Patricia Williams, greeted me with a concerned smile. Michael, I heard about the divorce. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Patricia. Actually, that's why I'm here. I need to protect my assets during the proceedings. For the next 2 hours, we restructured my accounts, moved my business funds to a separate institution, and set up ironclad protections for my retirement savings. Everything was legal, everything was documented, and everything was designed to ensure that Olivia couldn't touch a penny of money she hadn't personally earned. By the time I left the bank, my soon-to-be ex-wife had gone from expecting half of everything to fighting for scraps. My next stop was the courthouse, where I filed a restraining order against Trevor. Not because I was afraid of him, the man was a coward, but because it would be a matter of public record. Anyone who searched his name would find it, along with the associated allegations of adultery and fraud. The afternoon brought a pleasant surprise, a call from Sophie. Dad, can we meet for coffee? I want to hear your side of the story. We met at Starbucks near her school. Sophie looked tired, older than her 17 years, wearing the weight of her parents' failed marriage on her shoulders. Mom's been staying at Aunt Sarah's, she said without preamble. She cries a lot. She says you're trying to destroy her life. What do you think, Soph? She stirred her latte thoughtfully. I think there's more to this story than she's telling me. She won't explain why you filed for divorce so quickly, or why she got suspended from work. Smart girl. I'd raised her to think critically, to question narratives that didn't make sense. Your mother had an affair, I said simply, with a coworker named Trevor Morrison. It's been going on for 6 months. Sophie's face crumpled. Are you sure? I showed her one of the hotel receipts. Nothing graphic, just evidence of Trevor paying for a room that Olivia had used. I'm sure. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I hoped we could work it out privately, but your mother chose to make it public when she humiliated me in front of your grandparents. Sophie was quiet for a long time, processing the information. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have known better. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. This isn't your fault. What happens now? Now your mother and I get divorced, and we all try to move on with our lives. Are you going to be okay? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. Sometimes the end of something bad is the beginning of something good. That evening, I was working in my home office when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Olivia standing on the porch, looking haggard and desperate. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. We need to talk, she said. I thought you wanted all communication to go through lawyers. Michael, please. This has gone too far. We can work this out. Can we? You mean like we worked out your affair? Like we worked out your embezzlement scheme? She flinched at the word embezzlement. It wasn't like that. The company expenses were legitimate business costs. Stop. I held up a hand. Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen the receipts, Olivia. Hotel rooms charged to the company credit card for personal use. Fake client dinners that were actually romantic getaways, mileage reimbursements for trips that never happened. You don't understand the real estate business. I understand fraud when I see it, and so does Premier Realty's corporate office. She stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of alcohol on her breath. You're destroying my career over a mistake. One mistake, Michael. A 6-month affair isn't a mistake, Olivia. It's a choice. A series of choices, and the fraud, that was a choice too. I never meant for it to happen. Which part? The cheating or the stealing? She started to cry. Real tears, not the manipulative kind she'd use during arguments. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Please, she whispered. I'll end it with Trevor. We can go to counseling. I'll make it right. It's too late for that. It's never too late. We have 17 years together, Michael. We have Sophie. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It meant everything to me. That's why this hurts so much. I started to close the door, but she put her hand against it. If you don't drop this investigation, I'll tell everyone that you've been abusing me, that you're controlling and violent. I'll get a restraining order, claim you threatened me. And there it was, the real Olivia, emerging from behind the mask of tears and remorse, the woman who would destroy an innocent man to save herself. I smiled and pulled out my phone, stopping the recording app I'd been running since she arrived. You might want to reconsider that strategy, I said, showing her the screen. Making false accusations is a felony, and I have a feeling the police would be very interested in this recording. Her face went white. You bastard! I learned from the best. I stepped back and closed the door, turning the lock bolt with a satisfying click. Through the window, I watched her stand on my porch for a full minute, shoulders shaking with rage or grief. I couldn't tell which, and I no longer cared. The next morning brought news that made my coffee taste better than it had in months. Trevor had been arrested. Not for the affair. Adultery wasn't a crime in our state, but the corporate investigation had uncovered enough evidence of embezzlement to warrant criminal charges. Apparently, the fraud had been going on longer than I'd realized and involved more money than even I had documented. Trevor was looking at felony charges that could put him in prison for 5 years. Olivia, as his accomplice, was facing similar charges. My phone rang while I was savoring this development. The caller ID showed Sarah Chen's number. You snake. Sarah's voice was shrill with anger. Do you have any idea what you've done? I assume you're referring to the consequences of your friend's criminal behavior. She made a mistake. One mistake, and you're destroying her entire life. Actually, Sarah, she made hundreds of mistakes. I have the receipts to prove it. This is about revenge, not justice. You're right, I said calmly. It is about revenge. Your friend betrayed me, stole from her employer, and tried to turn my daughter against me. Did you really think I was going to just roll over and take it? She loves you, Michael. This thing with Trevor, it didn't mean anything. Then she should have thought about that before she decided to humiliate me in front of my parents. You're not the man I thought you were. No, Sarah, I'm exactly the man I've always been. You just never bothered to look beneath the surface. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. By noon, the story had spread through the local real estate community like wildfire. Olivia Thompson and Trevor Morrison, two of Premier Realty's top agents, arrested for embezzlement. The details were salacious enough to fuel gossip for months. My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. Saw the news, want to celebrate with a beer? Rain check, I replied. I'm not done yet. Because the truth was, I wasn't done. Not even close. Trevor was facing criminal charges, Olivia's career was over, and their affair had been exposed to the entire community. But I wanted more than their professional destruction. I wanted them to understand, on a personal level, what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. And I had just the plan to make that happen. The opportunity came 3 days later when I received a call from Detective Lisa Martinez of the White Collar Crime Division. Mr. Thompson, I'm investigating the embezzlement charges against your wife and Trevor Morrison. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the evidence you provided. We met at the police station, where I spent 2 hours walking Detective Martinez through every document, every receipt, every fraudulent transaction I'd uncovered. She was thorough, professional, and clearly impressed by the quality of my investigation. You should have been a cop, she said as we finished. I considered it once, but accounting pays better and involves less paperwork. She laughed. In this case, your paperwork is going to put 2 criminals behind bars. We couldn't have built this case without your documentation. Happy to help. There is one thing, though. Trevor Morrison's lawyer is claiming his client was manipulated by your wife, that he didn't know the transactions were fraudulent. I nodded. That's possible. Trevor's not particularly bright. Would you be willing to help us prove otherwise? What did you have in mind? Detective Martinez leaned forward. We'd like you to wear a wire. Get him to admit he knew what they were doing was illegal. The idea was delicious. Trevor, the man who'd been sleeping with my wife, unknowingly confessing his crimes to me while I recorded every word. When do we start? The plan was simple. I would contact Trevor, suggest we meet to discuss a deal, some way to minimize the damage to both our reputations. He would assume I was trying to protect Olivia and myself from the scandal. What he wouldn't know was that every word would be recorded and used against him in court. I called him that evening from my burner phone. Trevor, it's Michael. We need to talk. I'm not supposed to contact you. My lawyer says, your lawyer's an idiot if he thinks this is going away. We need to figure out how to minimize the damage. There was a long pause. What kind of deal? Meet me tomorrow night. The old warehouse district by the river. Building 47. It's abandoned, so we won't be interrupted. Why there? Because I don't want anyone to see us together. This conversation never happened, understand? Another pause. Okay, what time? 9 p.m. Come alone. I hung up and immediately called Detective Martinez. He took the bait. The next evening, I arrived at the warehouse early to meet with the police technical team. They fitted me with a state-of-the-art recording device so small and sophisticated that it was virtually undetectable. Remember, Detective Martinez said, we need him to admit he knew the transactions were fraudulent. Get him to talk about specific instances where he knowingly participated in the scheme. What if he doesn't show? He'll show. Men like Trevor Morrison always think they're smarter than they are. He believes he can manipulate you into some kind of deal. She was right. Trevor arrived exactly on time, driving his BMW into the empty parking lot of the abandoned warehouse. I watched from the shadows as he got out of his car, looking nervous but determined. The warehouse was a relic from the city's industrial past, all broken windows and rusted metal. Perfect for a clandestine meeting between two men with secrets to hide. Michael? Trevor's voice echoed in the empty space. Over here? I stepped out of the shadows, and he visibly relaxed when he saw I was alone. Thanks for agreeing to meet, he said. I know this situation is complicated. That's one word for it. I gestured to a pair of overturned crates. Have a seat. We need to figure out how to handle this mess. He sat down, and I could see the hope in his eyes. He actually believed I was going to help him. Look, Michael, I know you have every right to hate me. What happened between Olivia and me? Let's skip the apology, Trevor. We both know you're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Fair enough. What do you want to discuss? I want to know how deep this goes. The embezzlement, the fraud. How much money are we talking about? It's not as bad as it looks. Most of those transactions were legitimate business expenses. Cut the bullshit, Trevor. I've seen the receipts. Hotel rooms for personal use, fake client dinners, mileage reimbursements for trips that never happened. That's not legitimate business. That's theft. He shifted uncomfortably. Okay, maybe some of the expenses were questionable, but it's not like we were stealing cash from the register. These were gray areas, judgment calls. Gray areas? I leaned forward. You charged a weekend in Vegas to the company credit card. What client were you meeting in Vegas, Trevor? That was Olivia's idea. She said everyone did it, that the company expected a certain amount of personal use, so you knew it was wrong, but you did it anyway because Olivia told you to. I didn't think it was that big a deal. What about the fake mileage claims, the phantom client dinners? Did you think those were legitimate? He was sweating now, despite the cool evening air. Look, I made some mistakes, but I never intended to hurt anyone. You intended to steal from your employer. You intended to sleep with my wife. You intended to help her destroy our marriage. I stood up, towering over him. The only thing you didn't intend was to get caught. What do you want from me, Michael? I want the truth. How long has this been going on? How much money did you steal, and how many other people were involved? For the next 20 minutes, Trevor spilled everything. The affair had started 8 months ago, not 6. The embezzlement had been going on for over a year, and there were other agents involved, a whole network of fraud that the police hadn't even discovered yet. He talked about specific instances, naming dates and amounts. He admitted knowing the transactions were illegal. He even confessed to helping Olivia forge client signatures on expense reports. It was more than enough to put him away for a decade. So what happens now? He asked when he finished talking. Now you face the consequences of your choices. But you said we could work out a deal. I lied. I pulled out my phone and showed him the recording app. Just like you lied to your employer, to your clients, and to yourself. His face went white. You bastard. You set me up. Actually, Trevor, you set yourself up. I just gave you the rope. He lunged at me, but I was ready for him. 20 years of marriage to Olivia had taught me to see desperation coming from a mile away. I sidestepped his clumsy attack, and he stumbled past me, crashing into a stack of old pallets. When he got up, his expensive suit was torn and dirty. You think you're so smart, he snarled. But you're forgetting something important. What's that? Olivia never loved you. She told me everything. How boring you are. How small your life is. How she's been planning to leave you for years. You were just a placeholder, Michael. A safe, boring placeholder until something better came along. The words hit their target. For a moment, I felt the old pain, the familiar sting of inadequacy that had plagued me throughout my marriage. Then I remembered who I was now. Not the passive, accommodating husband who'd tried so hard to make everyone happy. Not the man who'd ignored obvious signs because confrontation was uncomfortable. I was the man who'd spent 6 months building an airtight case against his cheating wife. The man who'd outmaneuvered 2 criminals and handed them to the police on a silver platter. You know what, Trevor? You're right. She never loved me, but here's the thing. She never loved you either. That's not true. She used you, just like she used me. The only difference is I figured it out first. I started walking toward the exit. Enjoy prison, Trevor. I hear they have a special appreciation for white-collar criminals. I left him there in the abandoned warehouse, alone and defeated, while I drove home to call Detective Martinez. We got everything, I told her. Dates, amounts, names of other conspirators. He confessed to the whole operation. Excellent work, Mr. Thompson. This recording will put him away for a long time. What about Olivia? With Trevor's confession implicating her as the ringleader, she's looking at serious jail time. I hung up and poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. The arrests came at dawn. I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when I saw the police cars pull up to Sarah Chen's house across town. Through the window, I could see Olivia being led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Trevor had been arrested at his downtown condo an hour earlier. The local news was already calling it the biggest white-collar crime bust in the city's history. My phone rang. Sophie. Dad? I just saw the news. Mom's been arrested. Yes, sweetheart. I'm sorry you had to find out that way. For embezzlement? But I thought this was just about the affair. The affair was just the beginning, Soph. Your mother made some very bad choices. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, I'm coming home. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You're my dad, and you've been dealing with this alone for too long. An hour later, Sophie was sitting in our kitchen, looking older and sadder than any 17-year-old should have to look. How long have you known? She asked. About the affair? 6 months. About the embezzlement? I discovered that while investigating the affair. Why didn't you just confront her privately? I tried, Soph, but your mother chose to make our problems public when she humiliated me in front of your grandparents. After that, it became war. She nodded thoughtfully. What's going to happen to her? She'll probably go to prison. How long depends on how much money was involved and whether she cooperates with the investigation. Are you happy about that? The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? Satisfied, certainly. Vindicated, absolutely. But happy? I'm not happy that your mother is going to prison, Soph, but I'm not sorry either. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. I understand. Do you? Because I need you to know that none of this is your fault. Your mother and I failed each other, but we both love you. That will never change. She hugged me then, and I realized that despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the destruction of my marriage, I had gained something valuable. I had my daughter's respect, and I had my own self-respect back. The trial began 3 months later. Trevor had taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Olivia in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would serve 3 years in minimum security prison and pay full restitution to Premier Realty. Olivia, as the ringleader of the embezzlement scheme, was facing much more serious charges. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery and watching my former wife's life dissected by prosecutors and defense attorneys. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her crimes and the reality of her situation. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, hotel receipts, forged documents, recorded confessions, everything I had gathered during my investigation, plus additional evidence uncovered by the police. Trevor's testimony was particularly damaging. He described in detail how Olivia had recruited him into the scheme, how she had convinced him that the fraudulent transactions were standard practice, and how she had used their affair to manipulate him into compliance. She told me that everyone in real estate bent the rules, he said from the witness stand. She made it seem normal, even necessary for career advancement. When it was her turn to testify, Olivia tried to paint herself as the victim. She claimed that the pressure of a failing marriage had driven her to make poor decisions. She insisted that the embezzlement had been Trevor's idea, and that she had been manipulated into participating. Nobody believed her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and tax evasion. The judge sentenced her to 7 years in federal prison. As the bailiff led her away, Olivia looked back at me one last time. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, no defiance. Just the hollow recognition of someone who had finally run out of lies to tell. I felt nothing. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunshine. Sophie was waiting for me on the steps, along with my parents and Ray. "How do you feel?" Ray asked. "Free," I said, and realized it was true. The divorce was finalized a month later. Since Olivia was in prison and facing massive restitution payments, there wasn't much to divide. I kept the house, the business, and most of our assets. She kept her debts and her criminal record. Sophie decided to live with me full-time, at least until she left for college in the fall. We spent the summer repairing the house, fixing that leaky sink, painting the walls, replacing the broken things that had been neglected during the final years of my marriage. It felt like starting over. One evening in August, as Sophie and I were grilling burgers on the back deck, she asked me a question that had obviously been bothering her. "Dad, do you think you'll ever get married again?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday, but I'm not in any hurry." "Good," she said. "I like having you to myself for a while." "Me too." As the sun set behind our house, my house now, I reflected on the past year. I had lost a wife, but gained a daughter's respect. I had discovered betrayal, but also discovered my own strength. I had been the victim of a crime, but had become the architect of justice. Olivia and Trevor had thought they were so clever, so sophisticated in their deception. They had underestimated the quiet accountant, the boring husband, the man they thought was too passive to fight back. That had been their fatal mistake. 6 months later, I received a letter from Olivia in prison. She wanted to apologize, to explain herself, to somehow make amends for what she had done. I threw the letter away without reading it. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Sophie graduated valedictorian of her high school class and earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University. At her graduation party, surrounded by friends and family who had supported us through the darkest period of our lives, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine happiness. "Thank you," Sophie said as we cleaned up after the party. "For what?" "For fighting back. For not letting them destroy our family." "They didn't destroy our family, Soph. They just revealed what was already broken. And then you fixed it." I looked around our house. Truly our house now, free from the toxicity that had poisoned it for so many years. The walls were freshly painted, the sink no longer dripped, and the atmosphere was warm and welcoming again. "We fixed it," I corrected, "together." That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I sat in my home office and opened the safe where I kept important documents. Inside was a folder labeled Olivia Evidence. It contained copies of all the documentation that had brought down my ex-wife and her lover: bank records, photographs, hotel receipts, recorded conversations. For a moment, I considered keeping it as a reminder of my victory. Then I thought better of it. I fed every document into the paper shredder, watching years of careful investigation disappear into ribbons of meaningless paper. I didn't need reminders of the past. I had a future to build. 2 years later, I ran into Sarah Chen at the grocery store. She looked older, worn down by the scandal that had destroyed her best friend and damaged her own reputation by association. "Hello, Michael," she said quietly. "Sarah." "How's Sophie?" "She's doing well, Dean's List at Northwestern." "That's wonderful. She's a good kid." We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Two people who had once been friends before loyalty and betrayal had drawn battle lines between us. "Michael," Sarah's voice was hesitant, "I owe you an apology. I defended Olivia because she was my friend, but I was wrong. What she did to you, what she did to Sophie, it was unforgivable. Thank you for saying that. Do you think you could ever forgive her?" I considered the question seriously. Forgiveness was supposed to be liberating, a way to release the anger and resentment that could poison your soul, but forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing, genuine remorse, and a commitment to change. Olivia had shown none of those things. "I don't think about her anymore, Sarah. She's not part of my life." "But the anger." "What anger? She's in prison, her career is over, and her reputation is destroyed. Justice was served. What more is there to be angry about?" Sarah looked at me with something like fear in her eyes, as if she were seeing me clearly for the first time. You really did destroy her, didn't you? No, Sarah. I documented her crimes and turned the evidence over to the proper authorities. She destroyed herself. I walked away then, leaving her standing alone in the cereal aisle, finally understanding the difference between justice and revenge. The truth was, I had gotten both. 3 years after the trial, I received word that Olivia had been released early for good behavior. She was living in a halfway house across the state, working as a night shift clerk at a convenience store, trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of her own choices. I felt nothing about this news. No satisfaction, no anger, no curiosity about her circumstances. She had become what she always should have been to me, a stranger. Sophie was thriving at Northwestern, majoring in journalism with plans to become an investigative reporter. She said I had inspired her to pursue truth and accountability, to use her talents to expose corruption and hold the powerful accountable for their actions. I couldn't have been prouder. On a warm evening in September, exactly 4 years after that fateful dinner when Olivia had demanded a divorce, I was sitting on my back